everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. We're happy to have you this evening. We're very happy to have our guest tonight, Major Jeremy Dehart from the 53rd Weather Squadron, also known as the Hurricane Hunters. And goodness, I know it's been a busy, 2020 was a busy year for Jeremy and the team. And so we're going to talk about that tonight and kind of let you know behind the scenes what goes on these important missions to figure out all we can about these hurricanes to make our forecasting better and to help better forecast the impacts that affect you. So Jeremy, also a meteorologist. So we're interested to learn more about that part as he's on the flight working with all the other crew. And also a North Carolina boy. Didn't know this until we just started talking. He is from Lenior in Caldwell County, North Carolina. So Jeremy, welcome to the show. Happy to have you this evening. Being a local boy of the Carolinas, was there an important weather event that kind of got you hooked into the world of meteorology?
Not specifically. I mean, I grew up in North Carolina. I moved to Lenior, as you said, probably when I was in sixth grade or so. I was a Navy brat, so I kind of moved around. And not a specific weather event. I do remember, my dad telling me when I grew up, when I was young, I always grab the newspaper, grab the back page of the USA Today, and look at the temperature map on the back of the newspaper. And hey, Dad, it's 6 below in Minot, North Dakota today. Hey, that's great, Jeremy. And so I think a lot of other weather nerds out there can kind of relate to that growing up and always be interested in the weather. And so that's kind of where I started and followed that passion into studying meteorology. Went to NC State, so stayed in North Carolina for school, go Pack, and kind of just worked my way through the Air Force on the active duty side for about 12 years. And then I've been doing this job as a meteorologist and a hurricane hunter for the last 5 years or so. So it's best job in the world, in my opinion, for a meteorologist.
Jeremy, in the Carolinas, was there any specific person, TV or maybe, I know you said the newspaper there, any specific person that you kind of followed or is kind of inspiration? Or I know a lot of folks, it's like the movie Twister, or a lot of folks watch the Weather Channel. Any specific person or channel or anything like that kind of interests you as well?
Yeah, well, growing up in the western part of the state, we were in the Charlotte market, so all the TV meteorologists, Eric Thomas, Al Conklin, and Chris Suchan, who's moved on to San Antonio, but I ran into the two of them at a conference, a tropical weather conference a couple years ago when we had the airplane out there. So it's pretty small world in our community. It's kind of neat to see those guys you used to watch on television and kind of come full circle. We're all in the same in the same career field now. It's pretty neat.
Very cool. So we get to the big question here. Okay, it's to lead it out on the topic is, tell us a little bit about the 53rd Weather Squadron. You guys, I think this outfit's been around since 1944, since World War II, correct? I mean, it's been doing weather recon, part of the Department of Defense, and you tend to do this work with other departments as well, to cross over for NOAA and the partnerships, the Weather Service and NHC. So tell us about the 53rd and everything that you do.
That's right. We just celebrated our 75th anniversary of Weather Reconnaissance last year. So yeah, we've been around for a long time. Obviously, the technology behind it has continued to grow over that time period. But we've been flying in the WC-130 J model for the last 20 to 25 years or so, which is the J model is the newest variant of the C-130. And so, C-130s are used across the force, across the military for different missions, but it's a very rugged airplane. It's a very durable airplane. And so people, often ask, is it a specially fortified or something like that? And the answer is no. I mean, it's just a C-130, and they're basically flying tanks. So it's very good platform for what we do. And the W prefix is basically just the weather equipment that's been added to it to help us do this mission. So You mentioned our partners, our primary customers, the National Hurricane Center. And so the data that we get in the air in these storms is fed to the Hurricane Center in real time. And so we do a quality control check on all that data. They do another quality control check, and that's fed to the forecasters. And then from there, it's sent to the rest of the world. So you all see it within about 15 minutes of us sending it off the airplane. So of course, that gets directly fed into the models as well. So it's pretty neat, the technology and how quickly that happens.
So tell us a little bit about the data. Like things drop out of the airplane, right? People think, hey, is that potentially something that's gonna hit somebody on the head, or is it? I mean, it's weather recording data, but like, how is it dropped? Is there a tube and these what do they call? They're called radiosondes, and you drop them out, and they fall through the air. And so tell us a little bit about what these things do and what they're made of.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a basically inverse radiosonde. It's a drop sondes, or what they're called. And yeah, it's a tube. No more than a couple feet long and about the width of a Coke bottle. And we've got a tube that we shoot them at the bottom of the airplane. And so as soon as we release those from the plane, it immediately starts transmitting data from the sonde to the airplane, and we can watch it drop all the way down from flight level, which is typically around 10,000 feet in a hurricane mission, all the way down to the sea surface. So it's constantly reporting all the way down. Temperature, wind speed, wind direction, humidity, and pressure. And so that's how we get the vertical structure of the storm. And then the plane is also continuously have its own sensors that it's continuously monitoring horizontally as well as we're flying across the storm. So between the aircraft and the sondes that we're releasing, we can get a pretty good snapshot of what the storm is doing at any given time.
And there's also another set of data that's ongoing as well, where you're dropping sondes into the ocean for depth of water temperature, correct?
That's right. We have a partnership with the U.S. Navy, and those are called ADSBs, and those are buoys that are released in a similar fashion. But yes, same way, they drop out of the bottom of the airplane, and then instead of terminating at the sea surface, they actually submerge, and then you get a picture of sea surface temperature as well, which is also fed into the models, the air-sea interaction models after the fact.
Yeah, that's really important data. I mean, especially for rapid intensification, that data is it's super important to find out what your sea surface potentials are for your heating potentials, or they call it TCHP for exact, for technical. So back to the plane though, I did want to ask more questions. Anybody else had any questions about the airplane itself? But you're talking about old school propeller wing plane. Like how does that plane stack up against a jet? Would you rather fly a jet engine plane into a hurricane, or would you prefer the old school propeller planes?
Well, definitely not into the hurricane. And that's probably the biggest reason that we fly a C-130 is that they're slow. They're big and they're slow. And the reason being is they fly about half the speed of what a commercial airliner, a jet, would fly. And obviously there's a lot of turbulence in a hurricane, and the slower you can fly, the less you feel a lot of that turbulence. And then also has to do with the intakes. You don't want to get a lot of that precipitation into a jet engine, whereas the C-130 and the propellers kind of can cut off some of that precipitation from being ingested into the engine. So there's plenty of reasons we fly the old prop airplanes.
I've always wanted to ask that. I've just never heard a pilot talk about the differences between a jet and a propeller airplane. You can only guess, but thanks for clarifying that. That's really cool. Last question for me, I'll pass on to the other panel, but this one, man, 2020, holy moly, what a year, right? I mean, we got, a third of the way through the Greek alphabet. I can't even imagine how many missions. everybody involved, all the hurricane hunters had to do. Tell us about some of yours. How many did you, do you remember how many you had to do? Was it never ending? It seemed like,
Oh my
or
goodness.
yeah, maybe just go over some of your more memorable storms that you covered.
Yeah. It's hard to keep them all straight, to be honest. Again, we got an early start to the year. Arthur, I believe, was in mid-May. And then we flew all the way through, of course, the record-setting year that we had, flying all the way through November. Probably the most memorable was the kind of tandem storms we were flying with Marco and Laura. And if you recall, both of those storms were kind of entering the Gulf at about the same time, and which was kind of unprecedented. And especially for us, flying two different storm systems in the Gulf of Mexico simultaneously was a first for us. And I remember having to fly Marco in the Gulf of Mexico from Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, which is where we're based out of, recovering in Charleston, South Carolina, to then turn around and fly Laura, because Laura, actually Marco as well, they were both kind of hinting at making that curve to the north to where our operating base was going to be threatened. And then of course we can't fly, or we can't take off and land from a base where a hurricane's bearing down on our base. So that was another interesting thing of this year. I believe 4 different systems, 4 different storms, 4 separate deployments we had to evacuate the aircraft from Keesler Air Force Base to another operating area to be able to fly storms because of the threat to our own base. So it really was an unprecedented year in so many different respects.
Wow. And y'all just fly the Atlantic Basin, or do you also do the Pacific? Cover some of the Pacific, Eastern, North Pacific, or Central? We
do fly the Pacific Basin as well. We will fly the Eastern Pacific, so right off of Baja California area. We can actually fly those from Mississippi, and so that's a very long flight that can be 11, 12 hours, with most of that in just the en route time getting there and back. We'll also fly Central Pacific storms if they look to threaten Hawaii, and we'll forward locate out to Hawaii to fly it from there. And then of course we fly the Atlantic Basin, the Gulf of Mexico, and we'll forward locate out to the Caribbean, usually St. Croix, one of the U.S. Virgin Islands, to fly storms to that farther eastern extent.
Very good. Thank you so much. I appreciate all those answers. Good stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and pass you off to Dan. He's got the next one up. I'm gonna just listen for a little bit, and go ahead, Dan. You take it.
Does the view kind of change as you're at your cruising altitude and then you start descending? How does the hurricane look from that high up, and then of course once you get down to the actual hurricane, how does that change?
Yeah, it depends on the strength of the storm. Obviously, how big the storm itself is. Most storm missions are pretty benign all the way up until you're really in the storm environment. There'll be some cirrus and stuff, and even the stronger hurricanes, you're typically flying under that central dense overcast area. So it'll be cloudy above you, but a lot of times you can see the sea surface all the way up to 50 or so miles out before you start really getting into the banding. So a lot of times you wouldn't even realize you're getting ready to fly into a hurricane until you're within that 50 miles or so. But each storm is different. The bigger storms, you could even at that entry point 100 miles out from the center, you'll see the sea churning pretty good down there. And then some of the stronger hurricanes, you don't see anything until you get close, and all of a sudden it ramps up really quickly, and of course drops back down really quickly in the eye. So each storm's kind of different in that regard.
Well, Jeremy, you were talking about you guys never get any rest, and obviously 2020 was a crazy season. I'm curious, this isn't really my question, but Did 2020 get to the point where you just couldn't remember what storm we were on because we had so many?
Honestly, it does. You remember events. You remember, specific weather and specific instances or what have you. It's hard to tie that to a name and a period of time, because especially when you get really busy and you're just kind of jumping right from one storm to the next, it's hard. It's kind of hard to keep them straight sometimes. It was definitely one of those. It was definitely one of those years for that as well.
Yeah, definitely a crazy year. And like I was saying, you guys really not getting much of a break, because in the wintertime, you guys are flying winter weather missions and atmospheric river missions. And, that term atmospheric river has really hit home here in the Carolinas, as we've seen several setups, most notably 2015 with Joaquin and that flow of moisture coming into South Carolina. So tell us a little bit about those missions and what the goals are for those, and what you guys are trying to do to help better forecast these heavy precipitation events.
In hurricane season, our customer, our primary customer is National Hurricane Center, and the data that we're sending to them is not only to help the models, but to provide the forecaster themselves with the most current information, so that the Hurricane Center can then turn around and develop their products, their watches and warnings, advisory products for evacuation purposes. So similar to that, but for the winter season, but our customer is a little different in that it's actually NCEP, and the data that we provide is getting directly fed into the global models, the GFS, the European, and it's more dropsonde centric than it is us flying, kind of specific. We call them alpha patterns through the hurricane, big X's across the hurricane. For the winter season, they're more targeted and it's more dropsonde heavy. So they're more concerned with the vertical structure of the atmosphere and for the winter storm missions. And so we'll fly those as high as possible, which is usually in the, say, probably 30 to 32,000 foot range, and we'll just drop a ton of dropsondes. The last atmospheric river missions we've been flying the last week or so, it's typically about 20 to 25 dropsondes per mission that all immediately get ingested into the global models during that assimilation window.
That brings up a question for me. Is I'm not sure if you would know the answer, Jeremy, but what is the lead time for that data to make it into the next set of deterministic modeling? Say GFS is every 6 hours. So if you get that data in by 11 o'clock a.m., has the GFS already started populating and would go into the 6 p.m., right? So what would be the lead time for that? Like what would say, hey, what would be the earliest to catch this next model run? And do you time it that way as well?
We do. That's exactly how we time it. We time the entire mission around the GFS model assimilation window. So say for the 0Z run, we fly, I think the first sign can be ingested as early as 2030 Z, I believe. And then it goes a few hours after 0Z. So there's like a 6 hour window where the model is ingested into whatever that control time is for the model. And we will maximize the entire window to release dropsondes and send those off the plane and make sure they get ingested into the models.
Very interesting. I suspected that, but thank you. I just learned something really nice tonight. Thank you.
And for those who are listening, these to kind of bring it down to what you guys who may not be all into the weather world, are these missions, especially for winter storms, kind of help plot where that here in the Carolinas, at least, where that rain snow line is. And we all know it kind of sets up over Interstate 85 for whatever reason, but that's why these missions are so important, is because it's just extra tools in the toolbox that we use when we're forecasting these winter weather events that are always tricky of where that warm nose, where that rain snow line sets up. So these are important missions that all are given. So Dan, I know you had some more questions, so I'll toss it to you, and then we'll kind of close up with the interview here in a minute.
Great. Thanks, Scotty. Yeah, so I guess kind of all in all, thinking back to your all of your flights all together, do you have any memorable moments? I guess something I would pitch in is like a Coliseum effect on flying through an eye wall or anything that, is astounding.
Yeah, I would say my most memorable mission was the Michael landfall mission in 2018. Obviously, Michael was one of those. It ended up being a Cat 5 in the post analysis, and it strengthened all the way up right until landfall in the Florida Panhandle. And I flew that mission. It was the most turbulent mission I've ever flown. Specifically, the very last pass of that mission. We came in from the south, and it was right as it was coming, button up against the coastline, and we were easily seeing what would be Cat 5 winds down at the flight level, down to the sea surface, and we dropped about 2,000 feet in altitude between entering the eye wall where we exited the eye wall into the eye, and the turbulence was just incredible. And a lot of times the most turbulent storms aren't necessarily the strongest hurricanes. Because they're so well developed and constant, and wind flow and all that. It's typically the ones that are undergoing under rapid intensification, but that storm was just so strong, and the data that we were getting from it was just incredible. And then also what stands out the year prior, 2017, was Harvey and Irma. I flew the landfall missions of both of those storms, and that was back to back. And Harvey specifically was memorable because we were hearing radio calls to the Coast Guard from ships down in Corpus Christi Harbor, Mayday calls, and they were not able to reach the Coast Guard. So we were actually relaying calls on the aircraft from ships to the Coast Guard, and also gathering the data at the same time. And that was, it kind of puts a human element on what we do when you're flying, especially those landfall missions, especially, and you see the impact. I mean, the direct impact. And so it's why we do what we do. And that's why some of those storms just stand out as being the most memorable.
One more thing, and then we'll get a little bit more fun before we finish up. Any other things that you guys do? I know you're doing winter reconnaissance, you're doing hurricane hunters, but anything else that 53rd Weather Squadron, that you guys are helping out throughout the year?
Yeah, during our very short off season in the spring, we'll do the awareness tours, which have kind of been on hold last year because of COVID. We'll see what happens with this year. We're kind of going month to month with things at this point, but we do those for both in the U.S. and in the Caribbean. So those are about a week long. Scotty, we were talking earlier that you got a chance to see us when we were in Charlotte a couple years ago, and so we'll either go up the eastern seaboard, or we'll kind of make a Gulf Coast run. I think we kind of alternate every other year how we do those, and we just take the airplane around, and it's an opportunity to interact with the public, so they can kind of see what they do. They're able to get on the airplane and walk through, and we talk to them. And it's a good awareness of our mission. Air shows, we'll do air shows as well. And then again, just training to stay proficient and current in the airplane. And besides that, again, our seasons are pretty long, and so there's always some kind of reconnaissance to do. So we stay pretty busy.
Jeremy, I lied. I have one more for you. This is it. It's just fascinating. I keep learning more and more as we go along. The one thing I did want to know is, so when we look at the Hurricane Hunter path, right? And we're tracking the flights, right? We're watching what's going on. It's being tracked GPS. The data is coming out. That's being tracked as well. The flight pattern going over a hurricane, into it and over it. Is there a specific pattern, what we call maybe a ribbon or a bow tie, or what kind of pattern do you fly in there? Is it the same thing every time, or are you just going for specifics on each quadrant of the eye, of basically the storm?
Generally speaking, we do fly the same pattern. We call it an alpha pattern, which is the one that you'll typically see if you track us, online as we're flying. But it's essentially a giant X across the storm. So you'll start in one quadrant, say the northwest. You'll fly through the storm, dropping SONs along the way. You make a cross leg, and then you come back in from the other quadrant, the northeast to the southwest, and that would be considered one alpha pattern. Two passes, one big X is one alpha pattern. We'll vary the leg lengths. The standard length is 105 nautical miles. We'll vary the lengths depending on input from the National Hurricane Center. Obviously, they're typically most concerned with the strongest right front quadrant. So a lot of times they'll want to sample that quadrant first, or set it up in a way so we're going to sample the most impactful quadrants depending on where it might be making land or approaching land. Sample it. The longest legs through that may be shorter legs in the southwest. So just depending on what they want to see, we'll kind of alter those leg lengths. But that's pretty much the standard pattern we'll fly for a hurricane mission. And we haven't really talked much about our invest missions, which is, it's just typically it's just a blob of thunderstorm activity out over the open ocean, with the models hinting that it could develop. And so we'll just kind of go out there as low as possible and basically just try to fly a closed, or find a closed circulation. And from a meteorologist perspective, the invest missions are actually the most challenging for us, because there's no set pattern. There's no, you don't know what you're going to find until you get out there. And so they give you a coordinate, usually a point to shoot for. 9 times out of 10, it's not where the center is located, because they can't see it. That's why we're going out there to do what we do. And so at that point, then you're kind of ad-libbing it and just trying to figure out, is there a closed circulation or not? And we'll fly box patterns around that, just kind of box around it. We'll fly I believe it's called a delta pattern, which is more of a zigzag. If you can't find that circulation, you just kind of make a zigzag to kind of map out the trough, the periphery of the wave. So there are many different patterns. A lot of it can be ad lib depending on what we're finding or not finding.
We'll wrap up with some fun stuff, Jeremy. I know you said you're busy working a lot, but what's life like outside of the Weather Squadron? Any hobbies you like to do? You get back into the Carolinas, any at all? I mean, what's it like when you have a little downtime?
Well, I've got 3 kids that they keep me pretty busy. So I love spending time with my family, love spending time with my kids. I'm a sports nut. I'm still a big NC State fan, so always watching the Wolfpack. Phillip Rivers today just announced his retirement. You guys saw that?
I saw
tracking that today. So always tracking what former Wolfpackers are doing too. Love sports, love watching sports, love playing sports. So between that and spending time with my family, it's probably the biggest things.
So do they think Daddy's got a pretty cool job? He gets to go fly into these big hurricanes. I mean, have they caught the weather bug yet?
I'm doing my best. To, they're younger, so they have a hard time understanding exactly what it is or why anyone would even do that. So that's hard to explain to them sometimes. But they're interested in it. And I try to talk to them about as much as I can too. So
give them time, though. That cool factor will go up higher and higher.
I mean, Dan over here, he's getting ready to take it. Dan's getting ready to take his kids storm chasing this spring. So, I mean, you know.
Dan, I need to join
That's
you to
tough.
get my cool factor up instead of sitting in front of computers all day.
That's awesome. Get them started early.
Well, Jeremy, I would certainly appreciate your time. You have a really cool Twitter page that folks need to know about. So if they want to follow you, how can they do that?
Yep, I'm on Twitter. Just search for Jeremy Dehart 53rd, and and my organization again is the Air Force Hurricane Hunters, the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, who also has their Twitter page as well. So they'll be looking for us. We're always sending updates.
I think from all of us who are on tonight and all the panelists who wasn't able to join tonight's recording, we want to thank you for you and the team for the hard work you put in for 2020. And in fact, the last couple of years, and it's been a crazy couple of seasons with tropical systems. And we appreciate hard work and dedication you all are doing to get us the information so we can make sure people are aware and alert and ready for these tropical systems to approach. So we hope you get a little bit of downtime. We appreciate you joining us tonight. And we hope 2021 is maybe a little bit quieter for you.
Yeah, we could use a little break. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you for all you do.
And thank you guys for watching us tonight on the Carolina Weather Group. We'll see you back here for next week for another exciting show.